So, My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 354 has been officially released, and in this video, I just want to do a quick discussion talking about one simple question. How strong is All For One right now? We're going to be discussing the powers of All For One and what powers he can and can't have. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to do my discussion for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 354. And as I said prior, we are going to be discussing how powerful All For One is in respects to how powerful he is right now in the fight between himself and Endeavor, Hawks, as well as Jiro and Tokoyami, as well as talk about some differences between the official and unofficial translations that will lead into the discussion proper. So let's start off by talking about the differences between the official and unofficial translation. And relatively speaking, the differences are very, very minor. One major difference in the official versus unofficial is the name of the attack that Endeavor is doing towards All For One. Because in the unofficial translations, he calls it Burning Fist, but in the official translation, it's called Vanishing Fist. So that's just a small difference there. And another small and very insignificant difference comes from when All For One attacks Endeavor, and that in the unofficial translations, he says that I got you, but in the official translation, he calls it Oopsie Daisy. And I just find that very humorous, especially since that's also the difference between the title of the chapters between the official and unofficial translations. And I like this because All For One is saying this in a childish and playful manner as he is taking a literal chunk out of Endeavor's side, and it's like, oh no, oopsie daisy, I did an accident. Oh, I didn't mean to literally cut your guts out. So I just find it hilarious that the fact that he's pretty much being pretentious and is treating this as a game. It's like, oopsie daisy, I accidentally slammed into you, versus oopsie daisy, I literally cut you open. So it just fits with All For One's character, and I actually like the official more than the unofficial. And then the second to last difference when it comes to the differences between the official and unofficial comes from All For One's final speech towards the end of the chapter, and how he's comparing Jiro as well as Tokoyami in the unofficial translations to being side characters, while in the official translation, he calls them jobbers. And it's a very slight difference, and for the most part, the reference that he is making is that they're characters that aren't really going to do much and represent obstacles that normally are easily dealt with by the main bad guy. It's just that the terminology is just slightly different and can be interpreted in different ways, but overall doesn't make that much of a difference. And now we'll talk about the final difference between the official and unofficial translations, and this leads into the discussion proper, and it's that in the unofficial translations, you have Endeavor when he is fighting against All For One, is saying that the damage is piling up, his super regeneration can't keep up. But in the official translations, what Endeavor actually says is this: we're landing damage on him, he doesn't have anything like hyper regeneration. And if we just put aside the difference between how regeneration is named between both mediums, the unofficial translation is identifying All For One as having super regeneration, while the official translation is saying that he doesn't. And this is very important because this could lead into an idea that All For One is not as powerful as many people may think. So the question that I am asking is this: how strong is All For One really? And the thing that we have to keep into account when asking this question is that what makes All For One strong is the number and what quirks he has inside of himself. And that the number of quirks and how powerful the quirks that he has inside of him is an identifier for how strong he is. And this all boils down to an idea that we all have, that the quirk that All For One has is a copy, but that it's a copy of all of the quirks inside of Shigaraki, who has the original All For One. But the problem with this idea is that it's not actually confirmed that All For One, the user, has the exact same quirks inside of All For One inside of Shigaraki. There is no confirmation that that is the case, and it's all speculation. And it may be valid speculation because you think that if you're making a copy of the quirk, you'll also be making copies of everything inside of it. But then you start thinking about other instances involving All For One and the other interactions with the quirks. Because all we know for certain is that Dr. Kyurei Garaki has the ability of copying quirks, and that he has the ability to copy All For One as a quirk. But if you take into account that the My Hero Academia Heroes Rising movie is canon, And if you take the idea that the character of 9 being canon with the quirk of All For One, we've seen that even though this All For One is a duplicate and a very weaker version of it, that 9, when he got All For One, did not have a bunch of quirks inside of him, that he had to obtain new quirks on his own, which is why he acquired quirks like Air Wall, Scanning, Bullet Laser, Hydra, as well as Cell Activation Type A, because he didn't have any quirks inside of him besides All For One and Weather Manipulation. And that we aren't even confirmed or sure if he can actually share those quirks with other individuals. All we know is that he can take quirks. And even if you want to disregard 9 as canon, we once again still do not have confirmation that All For One, the person, has the same quirks that are inside All For One inside of Shigaraki. Because the only quirks that we know for certain that All For One has are Warping, Air Cannon, Spring-like Rims, Rivet Stab, Forced Quirk Activation, Impact Recoil, Multiplier, Hypertrophy, Rivered, Spear-like Bones, Kinetic Booster, Strength Enhancer, Infrared, Life Force, Radio Waves, an unnamed Telekinesis Quirk, an unnamed Levitation Quirk, an unnamed Lie Detector Quirk, Hellflame Fan, an unnamed Razor Blade Quirk, an unnamed Mouth Quirk, an unnamed Ooze Quirk, and an unnamed Hardening Quirk. Those are the quirks that we know for certain that he has, because those are the quirks that we've seen him use with the copy of All For One that he has inside of him. And many other quirks, which would include Super Regeneration, we have only seen inside of Shigaraki as well as the other Nomu. But we were unable to see that he has it within himself. And this doesn't include the possible multiple quirks that he could have that we just don't know about. But the fact of the matter is, he has a lot less quirks than we think of, and he has probably the quirk that many people would consider to be extremely and overpoweredly broken, which is Super Regeneration. So the real idea of this is how powerful is All For One? And in reality, he's probably a lot less powerful than we think, because all of the quirks that we know that All For One has, either in Shigaraki or in All For One himself, the original All For One person doesn't really have some of those quirks, or the quirks that he will have are not all combative based, and that they can have potential counters to it, and how it's a lot easier to defeat All For One because he doesn't have a Super Regeneration quirk based off the official translations. And this is most likely the case because when you have the fight in Kamino between All For One and All Might, because All Might specifically brings up the fact that the quirks that All For One had in that fight were completely different from the quirks that he had when they fought for the first time 5 years prior to that moment. Which I think pretty much confirms that the quirks that we see inside of Shigaraki are most likely only inside of Shigaraki. And even though you may assume that a quirk that All For One stole, aka Search, is inside of All For One the person, it may actually only be inside of Shigaraki because he probably could have stolen it a few days prior, that he could have stolen the quirk prior to gaining a copy of the quirk. Because we don't know how much time actually passed between the rescue of Bakugo and the kids being in the hospital. Because it could have been a few hours or it could have been a few days. And we don't even know exactly when All For One gained a copy of his own quirk, which could have also been within a few hours or a few days of the Kamino incident. So there's just so many gray areas when it comes to how powerful All For One could be, but what is for certain is that All For One is most likely a lot less stronger than we think. Not only for the fact that the All For One that he has inside of him has many different quirks and doesn't include Super Regeneration, means that he cannot heal from very serious injuries, but the fact of the matter is his body most likely is unable to physically handle the burden of those quirks. Because the reasoning why Shigaraki's body was modified was not only so that All For One could have a body to control that would be his new body, but so that Shigaraki could have a body that could handle the immense power of All For One with how much power is stored inside of it. And that All For One the person doesn't have a body physically fit to handle All For One the quirk anymore. Because as Hawk said in this chapter, both him and All For One are crippled, and that they are not as strong or as powerful as they used to be. So While I was editing this video, an idea popped into my head about when it comes to All For One and it being copied. I thought of Monoma, because we know Monoma's quirk is copy, and we know that he's able to copy a quirk with some restriction. And that restrictions is that even though it can copy certain quirks, it cannot copy certain resources that are accumulated within that quirk. Very similar to One For All and Aries' Rewind quirk. So we could say that Monoma has a natural form of copying quirks, very similar to what the Doctor was able to do with All For One, copying All For One and giving it to Shigaraki. So this could be the idea through Monoma that when you copy a quirk, you are unable to copy the accumulated resources, which would explain why a quirk like All For One given to 9 did not have any additional quirks with it, and how the same can be said about the copied quirk inside of All For One. So it's just an idea that popped into my head, which could be even more evidence to the idea that the copy of All For One that All For One has did not have any other quirks in it, because when you copy a quirk, you can only copy the baseline of the quirk and nothing that is accumulated with it. And that the only exception may be One For All due to the stockpiling nature of the quirk. So with that idea in mind, I think that very, very likely the All For One that is inside of All For One does not have the quirks that the original All For One has that is currently in Shigaraki, and that he had to obtain newer and more quirks, and that by doing so changed his fighting style in a way that All Might couldn't recognize from the last time they fought. So yeah, I just wanted to add this into the video because it's something that I just thought of when I was editing it. All right, back to the original video. So I can say with a fair amount of confidence that All For One is definitely not as strong as any of us think, and is actually weak enough for the heroes such as Endeavor, Hawks, Jiro, and Tokugami can potentially take him out, if not with full force, by destroying his mask, because he will be unable to breathe and eventually will go unconscious or potentially die. So yeah, I just really wanted to talk about this part of All For One because it's something that has been bothering me a little bit, even to the point where I've made a video about it, which I'll probably put up in this video talking more about the quirks about All For One and the other quirks that they could have and share. But overall, this was just a video that I really wanted to make and discuss. So let me ask you this. Do you think that All For One, the person, has the exact same quirks that are inside of All For One inside of Shigaraki? Do you think that they are completely different, or do you think that they have a shared pool of quirks and they both have the same ones inside of them? I would like to leave your thoughts down in the comments down below on what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and leave a like on the video if you want to see more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!